There's our Grassy Mountain. That's what it's all about right there. That mountain. Might not be special to some people, but I'll tell you what. Well, my name's Vern Emerd, and I was living at the base of a mountain in the Crow's Nest Pass called Grassy Mountain. I got a real love of that bush life and the undulating hills and all that. So when we bought that property, I had been looking in beaver mines and everywhere for an acreage. There was 3/4 of land for sale in the mountains. Cheap like borscht, 40,000 a quarter. Like, how golden could this be? And then, so we went with the realtor, my dad and I, to view this property. It was the last 3/4 on his paper to get rid of on his way out the door, because all the other pieces of property had a road access to it, except these 3. My dad made him an offer, and he wiggled at me underneath the thing, because the realtor didn't know that we were road builders, and not having road access to a piece of property didn't scare us. So the first thing that we did once we finalized the deal was went and built the internal infrastructure to service 3/4 of land and bridges and roads. We built in that property. So all of my family got behind me and helped me build a farm. Our weekends were consisted of working and socializing and building something that we all knew for the future was going to be right there. My grandkids would come and visit in a nice house on the mountain. And it was a ranch, a horse ranch, for 20 years. And then the Alberta government come in with a farm program, and we got power here right away through Alberta Farm Program. And it's been pretty easy living since then. Well, till the miners show up. And the Story, the Australians, do you know that one? They've been around since 2013. And in the beginning, I was friends with them. And at first, their proposals sounded like something that we would want and we would need. I retired in 2018. Just wanted to play on the mountain, you know, putter around.
Around 2013, a mining company called Benga started purchasing land in the Crow's Nest Pass. The land had previously been the site of a coal mine that closed in the 1950s called Grassy Mountain. It was right next to Vern's property. Benga Mining was a subsidiary of an Australian company led by Australian billionaire Gina Rinehart. The Australian newspaper described a previous mining project led by Benga's parent company as one of the worst deals in corporate history. For decades, Vern and his neighbors had shared, maintained, and improved upon a gravel road leading to their properties. This road was their only way to access their land. The road had never needed to be registered as a public roadway with the provincial government, but now the land it runs across is owned by a mining company.
And these miners come in and they seen a line on a map and they claimed it as theirs. And this is what they had said: you sell us that land for this price, or we're going to close the road and you'll have no access and your property will be worthless. Well, I took offense at that. It's just like, no way. You'll never do that as long as I'm alive. Them silly miners had got this thing to put a lock on the gate there. That was fine. They give me a key. Well, the stress that caused when you can't get in to your home and you go home, oh, the stress was unbelievable since 2019. I cut off the lock to gain access to the property. When you're down there at that gate and you got to go home, yeah, I did. I got charged from the RCMP, if you could believe that. This was a criminal offense for going home. This winter in January, there was a concrete block right by that gate we're on. So I couldn't even cut the lock and go through. There was a concrete block there. So they had squashed on my and my family's Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada. No individual or person shall be deprived the use and enjoyment of their property. And this is what the miners took away from us. So here I am, a landowner that's being tossed to the curb by a resource developer that I'm claiming is not a proper resource developer, because I've dealt with 3 other energy developers. I've dealt with Shell Oil, Devon, North Star, all previous owners of this land. Look at this. And they knew how to respectfully treat a landowner going forward, not these miners. They are bullies in their approach, and they're not even wise bullies, let me say.
We truly believe the moral compass of this company is good.
My name is Carmen Linderman, and this is Troy Linderman. Our group is Citizens Supportive Crow's Nest Coal.
My family has been here for 5 generations. Immigrants that came over from Europe that came to the Crow's Nest Pass specifically to work in the coal mines.
There's a picture of your dad in the Bellevue underground mine as a child.
Yeah, he was 13 years old when he started in the coal mine. So it's rooted in our DNA, and it's made us who we are. Approximately 50 years ago, coal mining left this community, but recently, in the last 8 years, there's been an opportunity to bring it back to this community, and see families come back to this community, and see our schools get full again, to see infrastructure being built, and industry brings that. We need mortgage-paying jobs.
Mortgage-paying jobs.
Most of our industry in the Crow's Nest Pass has left. We had a sawmill, it left. We had a gas plant, it left. We're 30 kilometers long and 1 kilometer wide with a big pile of rocks in the middle.
The only thing industry is going to come here for is coal, because it's the only thing that we have to offer.
Right now.
Right now, yeah.
If you have the development and the infrastructure and the pieces in place, then maybe that will attract other industries and other opportunities, because they don't have to make the capital investment to get the warehouse.
Just because we support resource extraction does not mean that we support the destruction of the environment.
We actually want to make it better. And the site that they want to do it on with Grassy Mountain is not a pristine new site. It's an abandoned coal mine. It was abandoned close to 50 years ago. When I was a teenager, there was bush parties, they used to call them, that went on up there. There's lots of old shacks and tunnels and things that you'd explore. It was, in retrospect, we were probably not the safest group of children and teenagers in the world, but it was there, and that's what we used it for. It's something that we never saw with the previous generations of companies. This one really seems to be community focused, culture focused. They want to do it. They want to do things right by this area, and that's refreshing.
They really want to be part of the community. They've donated a bunch of money through the Livingston Range School Division lunch program.
Built a kick golf course.
Yeah, we have a great golf course.
They made a huge investment, close to $29 to $36 million from my understanding. And right now we have a top 5 golf course in Alberta, top 50 in Canada. I think that's a real key, is that it's not just when it's done, what is it going to be? It's as it's going, what can we build this community into? And we're not naive. If this mine does go through, and we're hoping and confident that eventually it will, there's going to be disturbance. It will be a mine. But if they can do it right, the impact to the area will then turn to be positive, not negative. So it would be nice that if we could have industry here, bring families back, fill our schools, have a hockey team again, all of those kinds of really wonderful things, and help build that tourism infrastructure so that we could be set up after it's done with a wonderful area that's appropriately reclaimed. That makes sense to us. But we just got sick of sitting on our hands and no one pushing back to say, like, no, this can be done.
So we do all the farmers markets, we talk to people, give people information.
And then we see the success of it when you see a vote, you know, just for the Crow's Nest Pass, mind you, but come in at 72% in favor of bringing industry back to the Crow's Nest Pass. I have to give my wife kudos because she was the one that started it, and she's a huge influence on that.
Yeah. While the Lindermans see a future filled with the possibility for growth for their community, and while Vern is experiencing the personal impacts of the development of the mining project, the Australian miners were busy applying for exploration permits and filing applications for their mining proposal with the provincial government, who oversee the regulation of mines, minerals, and natural resources.
Well, the Grassy Mountain proposal was outside of that Peter Lougheed coal policy. It was just outside of those lands that he had set aside and said no coal mining here. And so that project moved forward a little over a decade ago. And in fact, by the time the application and things moved forward, I was the minister at the time. And the way the law works is if you apply and you are able to, there's no other laws prohibiting you from pursuing a project there, that it's that you go through a process. That's what happened.
And so what's typically being authorized at the outset is drilling exploration activities where the company is wanting to drill holes and sample to get an idea of what the quality of the coal looks like. In most cases, that's going to be where it's at. It's going to be a provincial approval process. But if it's a bigger coal project, which affects particularly fisheries issues or fish habitat issues, the feds are going to get involved. And the feds got involved in Grassy under the terms of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, as it then was. And in this case, the feds and the province agreed that the best way to deal with the overlapping jurisdiction was to send the project for review to a joint review panel. So the joint review panel conducts its hearings, long public hearings, on the Grassy project.
That is how we have, as Canadian society, decided that big things get built. Is that we have rule of law governed processes where community gets to have input, where community gets to ask questions about what's going to happen to my water. As it began to go through the process, it became very clear that the proponents, backed by these Australian billionaires, were not answering the questions adequately on what the downstream effects would be.
And what the joint review panel says is that we have the final decision-making responsibility under the Coal Conservation Act. And we conclude that it's not in the public interest. And it's not in the public interest because of threats to fish habitat of listed species of trout. It's not in the public interest because of the risk of selenium contamination. And it's not in the public interest because we think you've overestimated the economic benefits that are going to accrue from this project and underestimated the impact of the other downside consequences. And that was enough to kill the project, right?
You know, right back in the 1880s, one of the very first policy instruments that was put in place was to protect the eastern slopes. They said, no settlement. That's why we call it the Forest Reserve. It was a reserve from settlement. Because even back then, in the 1880s, they said this is where the water comes from. And the one limiting factor for our future prosperity, for the health of this province, for our families, is going to be water. We can run out of other things and find replacements. You cannot run out of water and survive. So that was recognized for a century and a half before the coal policy came off. The way they explore for coal is they take bulldozers and they cut big zigzags up the mountainside, and they dig holes every so often they dig cores out to find out what's underground. And when they're finished, these roads are still there. They're sitting out there in the elements. They're eroding mud and silt and floodwaters into our rivers, and then they're sitting there and baking in the sun, filling up with weed patches and leaving permanent scars on places that used to be pristine.
I started my career in 1971 with new coal exploration roads being driven all throughout the eastern slopes with absolutely no planning, no environmental oversight, problems accruing all over the place with sediment in streams, erosion from those things, fish and wildlife impacts. I also dealt with it in terms of operating mines in the Crow's Nest Pass. And, you know, there were a series of acute and chronic problems with those, including catastrophic landslides that buried a trout stream, well, actually buried 2 trout streams that used to contain native cutthroat trout, now being bereft of fish, period. So when that furor finally ended, you know, again, I thought coal is dead.
Well, you know, in the 1970s, when I was young, Premier Peter Lougheed coming into power with the Progressive Conservatives taking over from the Social Credit. Lougheed established an environmental conservation authority. They brought in the Eastern Slopes policy that put watershed protection first, and they also brought in a coal policy,
which reaffirmed an understanding that had come with the Eastern Rockies Forest Conservation Board back in the 50s, that the primary use of the eastern slopes should be for water supply, and it should be protected and managed as a healthy watershed so that it could provide water to all of the people living on the plains downstream.
Looking back, that was a very progressive-minded government. They were visionaries.
There was all sorts of integrated resource planning, and coal was never contemplated as a major new activity. It had been an old activity in the Crow's Nest Pass starting in the 1900s, but by the time the coal policy was passed in '76, coal mines were being shut down. The assumption was that this was an industry of the past. The whole concept of ripping off the top of a mountain and dumping that into a stream, which would then pollute and could wash selenium all the way down to Lethbridge, where I live and where my community is, it was just appalling.
Water was at the heart of the Joint Review Panel's decision to deny the Australian-backed proposal to strip mine Grassy Mountain. But why? Mining, extracting, and refining coal releases other chemicals and materials that have been trapped underground. One of the most concerning chemicals is selenium. When selenium gets into the water system at elevated levels, it builds up over time in a process called bioaccumulation, and it causes serious health issues in fish, animals, and in humans.
It's going to affect the water, it's going to affect the air, and the selenium that is going to be carried down the river, no one is going to be able to drink from their taps. The people are going to have to start looking for that extra money to go and find that clean drinking water. And then we have people on the reserve there within the nation who deal with respiratory illnesses already. So when the coal dust is blowing, this coal dust is going to land on their homes, seep into their windows, and they're going to start breathing it in. And we're not going to have a nation for our future generations.
Yeah, my name's Cor Blund. I'm a songwriter here in Southern Alberta. I travel all over the world singing songs about our region and our culture. I grew up outside of Taber, and we have a family ranch in the Cardston area that we've had since 1902, I think. So I think I'm a 6th generation Albertan, so I've been here a while. I grew up drinking water out of the Old Man River, so does my mother, so do my friends, and my friends irrigate out of it and feed their cattle out of it. I was brought into this by cattle people, ranchers that had been under threat of both their water and their places. And I think I've met with 4 government ministers and a bunch of people from across the political spectrum in politics. And I met with a couple of coal CEOs and some of the main Canadian coal lobbyists, as well as people on the anti-coal side. And I gave the whole thing a pretty fair shake, because I'm not anti-resource. I mean, I'm not naive about that. We need things to live in the modern world. But after I looked at it, the risk and reward on this project is really low, and it's really foolish and foolhardy and short-sighted.
People don't know, but the Oldman River Basin is home to 2/3 of Canada's irrigated agriculture. This is an agri-food hub in the Oldman River Basin, with the city of Lethbridge at the center. There's billions of dollars invested in agri-food in the Oldman River, and that is now being jeopardized by the coal mine that's going to go in the headwaters called Grassy Mountain. So that's a big concern for all of us.
Water quality impacts, we're concerned about water quality impacts as well. With the rules and regulations set out by the Alberta Energy Regulator, they're just simply not allowed to poison the water. People downstream won't be affected negatively by the mine going in the area. So there are ways to mitigate selenium. So downstream will not be negatively affected by this project.
I tell people, think back to when we had the mad cow disease issue. Basically, our whole beef industry shut down, and countries all over the world would not accept Canadian beef from Alberta. On the day when a product is shipped to the United States or to Japan or anywhere else where excess selenium levels are detected in the product, that means our whole agri-food industry in the Oldman River Basin will likely have to shut down until we resolve the problem. The issue is that with selenium, it's not very easy to resolve. The selenium contamination is something that builds and builds and builds. It wouldn't just be a one-time thing, it would be a long-time lasting thing, would be very difficult to eradicate. We've seen what's happened in Elk Valley in BC. We've seen the efforts that Teck has made to try and resolve the selenium problem in the Elk River. And there are communities in the Elk River Basin that can't use the river for potable water. And that's a big concern for us in Southern Alberta. What are the other options for water sources? There really aren't any for the city of Lethbridge. I've lived all over Canada. I've lived in Eastern Canada, in Nova Scotia, in Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland, in times when jobs were scarce. I fully understand the need in an area that is suffering in terms of economic development, why the people who live there would want to have some type of gainful employment. But it's also important to provide opportunities for employment afterwards. So coal is a very short-sighted type of investment.
One of the challenges that any new bituminous project faces these days is we're probably looking at a declining demand for bituminous coal as we move towards electric arc steel making. The consequence of that is only the best quality coal is going to get to market. So one of the real issues here is, are we potentially going to authorize a project that's going to die in a few years because the market isn't going to sustain this project, all the projects that are currently running in Elk Valley just across the border in British Columbia, because it will be a competitive market and buyers are going to go to the highest quality coal that they can get.
I want to reiterate about the cleanup bill because, if you look at the orphan well situation and how the taxpayer is on the hook for billions for that, it's the same regulatory board that handled that's handling this coal thing. So I would stake my reputation that at the end of this thing, if it's 15 years or 30 years, whenever it is, there's going to be a hell of a mess to clean up in the water, and it's not going to be the coal companies paying for it. They're going to go bankrupt, or they're going to restructure, or they're going to go back to Australia. It's an old playbook. They never figure the cleanup costs, the real cleanup costs, into their business model, and our government lets them get away with it.
As it began to go through the process, it became very clear that the proponents, backed by these Australian billionaires, were not answering the questions adequately on what the downstream effects would be. So that was the first problem. And then the second problem came when Jason Kenney took power, and on a Friday afternoon, right before a May long weekend, in the middle of a pandemic, he rescinds that 50-plus-year-old policy that protects areas next to Grassy Mountain. I'll never forget that Friday afternoon because people understood exactly what the government was opening the door for coal mining companies to do.
When the coal policy was rescinded, by the Kinney government. I think it came as a bolt out of the blue, and I think many people thought, and wrongly so, that the Eastern Slopes policy and the planning for the Eastern Slopes was a forever thing. That coal was in a sunset situation, and that we could expect that we could move forward on more progressive, evidence-based, ecologically relevant land use policies.
Well, and I found it so interesting was that it was Peter Lougheed who had the vision and the foresight to put the coal policy in place and the Eastern Slopes policy in the first place. And here was a conservative government disbanding it all. And what had changed? Public opinion hadn't changed. The Eastern Slopes had been further impacted by our activities, but they're still our water tower. So it was just obvious that there must have been some significant lobbying going on by the coal industry behind the scenes with our elected politicians. And of course, the recent Freedom of Information requests, which took years to come to a resolution, demonstrate that there was a lot of insider trading, should we say, of ideas. Albertans understood that, even though we didn't have the proof at the time. There was an understanding that somebody's got somebody's ear, and it's shutting out a lot of Albertans and what they value.
That the fix was in.
I've never seen a coalition that formed as diverse and as effective as the one that developed when he took off the coal policy.
You know, in my 50-some-odd years as a practicing biologist, I have never seen people come together in a common cause from so many different walks of life, politically, economically, geographically, urban, rural, rancher, farmer, recreationalist, in an overwhelming crescendo of cries for, "This is dumb. Why are we doing this?"
People would stop me as I was going about my business, just going for a walk out here in the coulees, just even behind me. And people would stop me and say, "Shanna, did you hear about this? You know, what are we going to do?" Right? And so it became pretty clear to me that there was some doing to be done. And I was part of the doing.
Coming together was partly evolved from working together on the land use planning, because we'd sat around tables with different interests in developing a footprint management plan for, say, the Livingston Porcupine Hills. And we'd grown to understand and trust each other.
My wife and I have got property on the Old Man River just north of Calgary. And so I got involved with a group called the Livingston Landowners. And it's just basically a non-profit, non-charitable status group of concerned local people that love their agricultural economy, love their healthy landscape, and want to keep it that way. And so it's sort of a watchdog group, making sure that other people's plans don't mess it up. That involvement was very enriching, very good, because it was just people working from the goodness of their heart and from the love of the land, right? Rural Albertans that care, and rural Albertans that are willing to put their money and their time where their hearts are. Campaigns
like the put a sign on your lawn campaign, like Stop Coal, were very powerful. And it was a surprise to me that they started popping up all over my neighborhood, when I hadn't really talked to many of my neighbors about these issues. Historically, it might have been each interest for themselves, but in this situation, we had grown to know and trust each other's points of view, and knew we had shared vision for the Eastern Slopes, and it did not include coal.
Folks out of Kaina, the Niitsitapi Water Protectors, largely led by women, who were folks who raised this to the level of great concern at the level of the Kainai Chief and Council. And that was where you saw a lot of court and legal activity on behalf of the Kainai.
Social media had a big part in it. It allowed the messages to spread much more widely, much more quickly.
They engaged their elected officials directly. They made videos. They signed petitions. They made donations. They put up Protect Our Water signs. They did the things that citizens are expected to do when a government rides roughshod and they're doing something that folks don't like.
And it was great that the artist community also came on board, because artists wax eloquent about the beauty of the Eastern Slopes. John Ward Hammond's Church of the Long Grass, that's the foothills of the Rockies. Francis Gardner, a longtime rancher, wrote songs.
And people like Corb Lund came out swinging, and became a lightning rod.
I've spent my entire musical career staying out of politics on purpose, but this particular issue was so local to me and so important and so egregious that I thought it was important to try to help out the ranchers on it. The moment I think that really pushed me into my decision was the government's attitude with me, because I met with the environment minister as well as the energy minister as well as the coal companies, and I just thought they were all lying to me. Like I'm not stupid, the answers I was getting were not on the level, I don't think. I didn't feel like they were being honest about the whole thing, and I could sniff it out. Like, it's, you know, if somebody's got a clear position and can state it, I can digest that, but I wasn't getting clear answers. I was just getting a lot of, you know, don't worry your pretty little head about it, we got this covered kind of thing. And the more I looked into it, the more I felt that the government was doing nothing but trying to fool us. And so that kind of pissed me off. And so, you know, at that point I kind of dug my teeth into it, and I'm not going away. Yeah, I've had death threats and violent threats, both in real life and online. There's a lot of like online stay in your lane, shut up and sing stuff, but my answer to that is the same as I mentioned before. I drink the water, my mother drinks the water, our animals drink the water. I live here. And I find it breathtakingly selfish the way that they think that their handful of jobs is worth more than our water downstream, that I've sort of lost patience with it, frankly.
But because of his voice and his songs and his advocacy, it created another groundswell of interest in the Eastern Slopes and what was going on. And I think added to the anger that this was something that Albertans were not behind.
Yeah, it became more a matter of the heart than of the mind.
You had this great confluence of events, which I understood right away that you'd have because I knew the players, where you have Indigenous nations, you have a downstream community that does not mind making itself heard, that is to say Lethbridge, Alberta, where you have folks who have dug in for appropriate environmental governance, conservation, water quality. We have a scientific community here that has dug in on these. They have engaged in what we as a liberal democracy ask them to, that is to say active citizenship. So you can call it politics, you can call it active citizenship, you can call it representative democracy, you can call it the guardrails of the institutions of liberal democracy if you like. The fact is they worked.
And then when there was the outpourings of Albertans that they wanted the coal policy reinstated, and then Sonia Savage reinstated the coal policy, I thought, whew, something good has happened here. Right has prevailed.
It was amazing. It was really something working with so many people who, they all had maybe a different priority. Like some people were concerned about maybe their cultural values, maybe other people were concerned about their grazing rights and the grazing pasture, other people were concerned about water. But they were all united in their concern about protecting the Eastern Slopes from coal strip mining, and they came together as one people. It was so cool.
For all the times we throw up our hands and go, nothing works anymore, and the bad guys always win, this time they didn't. The bad guys skedaddled. You know, a big smile comes across my face when I say that, because it is awesome when individuals and communities and people of varying interests come together to preserve the public interest and to act in the public interest and to also interact with our institutions in a good faith way, going through the various legal doors, going through the political doors, mobilizing communities, getting people to speak out. This is a model of how we want our democracy to work.
After years of public hearings and considering evidence, in 2021, the Joint Review Panel declined Benga Mining's application for the Grassy Mountain project. Subsequent appeals made by Benga up to the Supreme Court of Canada also failed. Virtually everyone agreed the Grassy Mountain project was done. After a prolonged public campaign to protect the eastern slopes, the UCP government announced that they would reinstate Peter Lougheed's 1976 coal policy, and they issued instructions for the Alberta Energy Regulator to pause further coal mining applications.
Why is it still there? Well, in my view, that project, in other words, the project which was put before the JRP and developed at great length, is a dead project. But Benga, now Northback, says we want to do some additional coal exploration in this same area where we've got the property rights we talked about before. And ordinarily, we'd say, with the reinstatement of the coal policy and the direction that the minister gave to the AER should not be considering new coal exploration activities. But Northback says, but there's an exception in that ministerial direction to the AER, and it's an exception for something that's called an advanced project.
Calling a dead project an advanced project is the kind of thing that George Orwell would have written about. It's talk about newspeak. It's impossible.
So by Brian Jean sending a letter to the energy regulator telling them that they should look at the Grassy Mountain mine as an advanced project is interfering with justice, in my view.
My view is, well, there was an existing environmental assessment application at one time. It went through a process and it came to an end.
Well, it was under consideration by panels of experts, federal and provincial panel of experts, and they subsequently refused it. At that point, it was not an advanced project, it was a dead project.
And therefore, there's nothing on Grassy which can be an advanced project.
So bringing it back under that guise is a real betrayal of integrity, because either the government means what it says or it doesn't.
In my view, then, the AER should never have even accepted these new exploration applications from Northback. But they did.
And if it says that there's not going to be strip mining in the Rockies, and there's not going to be consideration of any projects that aren't advanced, and then it brings a dead project back from the dead and calls it advanced, how are we supposed to trust anything else they say?
And it becomes this situation of heads they win, tails they flip again, and again, and again.
More than one Australian crew come to town, but the people were aware and they seen it. So, and we went to court, we went to JRP, we went to court. We give them one of these through the goalpost, but they just don't know how to take it. Right now they have an application into the AER to drill 47 exploratory wells. I've seen the paper, exploratory wells on my property without even talking to me.
Why would you do any more coal exploration when you know that your project is dead? The only reason is because you want to actually go back and ask again. How are you going to get a different answer? That project was turned down on the basis of the fact that there's not enough water and that the water that they use will be irreparably damaged, and the endangered trout species that live there cannot be saved under those circumstances. So None of that has changed. Those streams are still tiny. The trout are still endangered. And not only that, you know, we're 3 years into a drought. Water's not becoming more abundant.
That decision has been appealed to the Alberta Court of Appeal, and the Alberta Court of Appeal has given leave to argue that case on the merits. So we're still awaiting that. And again, in my view, the AER should have said at that point, oh, well, let's hold back. Let's wait until we hear what the AER, what the Court of Appeal has got to say. But instead, as you will know, they've set the matter down for hearings, and now, most recently before Christmas, Minister Jean saying, well, we think we're now going to come forward with some new coal legislation in the next sitting of the legislature in the spring. I was frankly gobsmacked. And I was gobsmacked because if you look at the directive that was given to the AER, it was that we're going to continue to suspend all coal exploration activities except for these exceptions. They said we'll wait until we've got the land use planning job done. We're going through a review right now of the South Saskatchewan plan, and then they say, notwithstanding all of this, we think we're still open for coal. So really sending, you know, very, very mixed messages.
And what are they going to do now? Whatever they can get away with. I mean, is the honest answer to that. Do they know what they want to do? No, not particularly. They'll probably try to Trojan horse things in. That's politics. And if people don't want it, they're going to have to do politics to stop it.
What we have always said is this is not a right versus left issue. This is a right versus wrong issue.
It's important that this doesn't become a political tribal issue. The goal here is to make all the politicians understand that Albertans don't want coal mining in the Rockies, and it has to be a social understanding, and that topic just has to become so toxic that nobody in the right mind in politics wants to go anywhere near it. That's my goal. It really helped that a lot of conservative voters as well didn't think it was a good idea as well, you know, and it was urban people, it was rural people, it was First Nations people, it was small town people, it was across the board. And the message has been pretty clear that we don't want any coal mines in the Rockies. And the polling has been clear on it, and the public outcry was unprecedented about it.
And I'll tell you right now, it's not an easy job. No, it's not. But I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing as much work I possibly can while I am walking and still can walk. This is the third event that has taken place here in Southern Alberta. The first one was in Pincher Creek, the second one was in Fort Macleod, and today was the third event before the AER hearings. In regards to the future generations, I want them to remember that I stood for them. And I did my best to fight for their clean water and their clean air so they don't have to live with diseases and illnesses. You know, I fight for everybody. I'm fighting for everybody. I'm not just fighting for, you know, of course, our future generations, but everybody that's going to be affected by this.
I have a whole other job to do, and so do the ranchers. They need to be feeding cattle, and everybody involved in this fight on the anti-coal side have jobs. And I feel like the government and the coal companies think they can just grind us down, and that's their strategy. It's an old playbook. They just grind and grind and grind until they finally win. But frankly, at this point, it's just galvanizing us. Like, we're pissed off. Like, people are not happy about this because we have to do. And I don't need to be going to Calgary tomorrow for this hearing, but I got to go. And I don't need to be doing this interview with you guys, but here we are. And I didn't need to spend 2 hours on a coal meeting this morning, but I had to. And so this has been going on for years now. So yeah, we're in this thing for good. We're in this thing till the end.
When the coal policy was brought back in, and as a result of that sort of uprising of grassroots Albertans, when it came back in, I went to a little celebration at a ranch just off the edge of the Livingston Range, and I looked around, and I could see Siksika and Piikani people, ranchers, urban environmentalists who looked rather out of place, business people, musicians. There was like people from every walk of life who had never met each other before. These are people that maybe often talked about each other but never talked to each other, but coal brought them together. And I remember thinking, you know, this is Alberta starting to become everything it always was meant to be when those treaties were signed. It's the coming together of people to say, we are all of this place, we love this place, and we will fight to defend this place. They came together as one people. It was so cool. You know, I hope we can sustain that. And I hope that we can go from organizing around what we're against and staying organized around what we're for. Because this province deserves the kinds of people that when you look at the scenery, and you look at the landscape, and you look at what we've got here, that a place like that deserves, you know. And for a while we had that, and I think we still do.
What we should be doing is focusing on restoring the environmental impacts that we already have. And I think the idea of a conservation corps that employs young people and strong people to reclaim all of these disturbances would be the best expenditure of our public dollars instead of supporting another boom and bust kind of industry.
What we should be doing, instead of extracting more wealth out of the eastern slopes, is investing in the eastern slopes.
There is a way to stitch better conservation together up the eastern slopes into the Bighorn. It should absolutely get done. It should get done for this generation and for future generations. It is worth it to do it. It is hard work. Hard things are hard, people. When I was environment minister, I made it a priority. When we extended the castle protections, meaning the extending conservation north from Waterton National Park, conservation lived in my heart. That's why I was okay with, in the end, paying a bit of a personal price to do it and to get it done, because it is durable, it is resilient, it connects at a very, very deep level to who we are as human beings, but also having that connection to the natural world spurs us to do good in other places and to act in the public interest in other places.
Isn't a forest a lovely thing? The smell of it and the feel of it. There's our Grassy Mountain. That's what it's all about right there. That mountain. Might not be special to some people, but I'll tell you what.
We thought Grassy Mountain was safe and was fine, but now those darn Aussies plan again to mine. They thought that by changing their name to Northback, that people won't notice it's ethics they lack. The last time they tried this, the feds told them no. So we say to Northback, just pack up and go. Waltz away, Northback, waltz away, Northback, waltz away home, leave our mountains alone. The water and wilderness are Alberta at their best. Waltz away, Northback, pack up and go home. The fate of our mountains and water we fear depends on this message ringing out loud and clear. So now Southern ranchers and activist group must once again rally and bring out the troops. So stay away north back as we all say no. Return to Australia, for home you must go. Waltz away north back, waltz away north back, waltz away home, leave our mountains alone. The water and wilderness are Alberta at its best. Waltz away north back, bugger off and go home.